Artifact farming in Genshin Impact is like the ultimate level of gacha hell, so even if you feel like $1,000,000 when you get that perfectly leveled piece, 99% of the time, it sucks. Hey everyone, it's Sevi. I've been playing Genshin Impact and making Genshin guides for almost 3 years now, and one inevitable part of character building is artifacts. Building up your artifacts is a wild and often disappointing experience for any stage of farming. It can feel overwhelming starting out, it can feel draining throwing all your resin into one domain and not getting anything back, and after too many bad rolls, it can ultimately burn you out. So I'm bringing you updated tips to hopefully make the experience easier and more efficient for you by helping you form good artifact farming and management habits, whether you're a relatively new player or a long-time one. There's a whole bunch to cover, so let's jump right in. First of all, know the AR45 breakpoint. If you've asked or looked around when to seriously start farming artifacts, most advice point to the magic number AR45, and there's a good reason why. More specifically, you should avoid cracking all the fragile resin you've collected to go crazy on artifact farming until you reach that point. That's because at AR45, you unlock the highest artifact domain level that guarantees at least one 5-star drop of the 2 main artifact sets, which is why it feels more worth your resin. It's also when the artifact Strongbox unlocks, where you can start recycling pieces for more artifacts, but we'll get to that later. Before that point, it's generally better to use your resin for leveling characters, their talents, and weapons. However, that's not to say that artifacts are useless during this time, as they're still a valuable component of your character's strength. For instance, if you find progressing through quest fights or even domain farming difficult in general before AR45 because of your underbuilt characters, then having some decently leveled artifacts, even if they're 3 to 4-star quality, may still be very helpful to more easily get you through those mid-game hurdles. It's okay to occasionally spend some normal resin to farm some domains if it really feels like your lack of artifacts or underleveled artifacts are making fights too hard. But if you ask me, try to use artifact pieces you get from rewards or boss fights as much as possible for builds and for fodder, and they might take you far enough to get to this point. Just save your fragile resin that you've been collecting over time to spam those AR45 domain levels rather than lower ones. Though don't forget to continue farming character and weapon ascension materials plus talent and XP books to level up the other aspects of your character. At the end of the day, farming artifacts to strengthen your character depends on RNG, while raising your character's base stats and multipliers are surefire ways to make them permanently stronger. Getting your main characters to at least level 80 is a good baseline goal, and you can later choose which to bring to 90 once you're able. As a quick criteria, characters that scale in HP, defense, or transformative or quicken reactions will generally appreciate those last 10 levels more than regular attack scalers. It'll be a lot of continuous domain farming, so if farming an AR45 domain feels too hard, don't hesitate to join co-op or get a higher AR level friend to help you. I and my theory crafter friend Migo both have Discord servers with communities of people who are willing to help you out there, so feel free to join in using the links below and ask around for help. Tip number 2 is to manage your artifact XP. Related to leveling artifacts, you may not have a lot of fodder to start with to level your pieces, especially when you're not mass farming artifacts before AR45. And even when you do, and you start leveling up those 4 and 5-star pieces, you can easily find yourself running out of fodder. It can take a lot of artifact XP and Mora to bring a 5-star artifact from +0 all the way to +20. The amount of XP needed per level increases as well, so it's important to not waste all your XP on artifacts that aren't showing good potential and recognize when to cut your losses, particularly at the +12 or +16 mark where you need massive amounts of XP just to get the next roll. If a piece isn't looking good by that point, you can hold off on leveling it further and wait for a better piece to come along. If you can afford to, feed the worst piece. Feeding leveled up artifacts to others is one way to recycle XP, but note that it also has lower XP returns past a certain level, so its value can diminish, especially for artifacts at higher levels. A trick for early leveling is feeding a +4 5-star piece, which is always going to give enough XP to bring another 5-star piece from +0 to +4, so you can find out those initial rolls and waste less artifact XP. But another main source of artifact XP that you can collect without spending resin are actually locations in the overworld that drop low-quality artifacts, and these also refresh daily. This can take 10 to 20 minutes every day, depending on how meticulous you want to be, and there are definitely a lot of YouTube guides that can show you the route. In my first few months of playing, I made sure to add this to my daily routine if I had the time. These drops can really add up over time, and they helped boost the rate I could level my artifacts without having to rely on artifact drops in domains where I had no choice but to spend resin. In fact, you can even convert these artifact drops into Mora by destroying them in the inventory. You can also get artifact XP fodder from your Serenity pot if your trust rank is high enough, but if you need the other stuff in there, then prioritize those, of course. There are also artifact vendors around the open world that you can buy 2-star pieces from, but they're 2,000 Mora each, so I personally would just rely on the free artifact route unless you're somehow stacked with Mora already. My next tip is to set practical expectations. Any longtime player will know that artifact farming takes time and resin because it's all gacha. You might be seeing all these build showcases and cracked artifacts, but those really take a long time to accumulate. Always remember, it's perfectly normal and okay to start and stay with lower quality pieces for a while. And on that note, when you're just starting out your serious farming goals, don't completely ignore the 4-star drops, okay? 4-star pieces with the right stats can be temporarily better than a 5-star piece with the wrong ones. You might also miss out on getting pieces with rare main stats like Elemental Mastery or Elemental Damage bonuses just because you're not paying attention to 4-star pieces from your domain farming. Of course, longtime players will showcase 5-star builds and scoff at the idea of using lower quality pieces. But when you're not at that stage yet, you have to be practical with what you get. For some specific sets, which we'll tackle in a bit, the 4-piece set bonus itself can be more valuable than the actual quality of the piece. So even just using 4 stars in the meantime can help achieve those bonuses. And speaking of main stats, there is one big general principle that can guide you in every stage of your artifact farming. Stats over sets. There's a saying, stats over sets, which holds a lot of truth for those who really understand how hard it is to both farm through those layers of RNG while trying to optimize characters. Getting the right stats for most characters should be your first priority. Even when you're just starting out, you have mostly 4-star artifacts from your world progression and farming bosses, but not a lot of 5-star pieces yet. And a lot of them would be Gladiator's Finale and Wanderer's Troop pieces from boss fights, or the odd other sets you might have picked up in your initial attempts to farm. Whatever the case, learn to prioritize the stats. That comes with understanding what stats your characters value, of course. By the time you're taking artifact farming more seriously, that will also be the point where learning more fundamentals of character mechanics, stats, and building will come into play. But with RNG working against you, find out how you can make your characters functional enough rather than shooting for optimizing stats too soon. For example, are both an attack and EM main stat sands applicable for this character, like with Tignari or Alhaitham or even Fischl? Can you settle with an attack goblet first before moving on to an elemental damage goblet? In a lot of cases, yes. And just as a quick note, if you need ideas on what main stats to look for, you can of course go looking for guides, but there's also in-game data that you can consult to help point you in the right direction. Anyway, don't get too hung over substats right away as well. It's generally better to have a piece with the right main stat but poor substats than a piece with a completely wrong main stat but good substats. On the other hand, some 4-piece sets are special. The best examples of this are the Viridescent Venerer and Deepwood Memories, which can both shred the enemy's elemental resistance, thereby amplifying the damage they receive. These are special effects that are not just for the user, but for supporting other teammates as well. The Instructor and Exile sets are also very good support sets with team-wide buffs, though they don't have any 5-star equivalents. As such, these are particular 4-star quality artifacts that I would recommend saving and using even in the endgame. For such sets, it's a bigger priority to complete the set and then refine the stats later on. Knowing which pieces and or sets to initially aim for are just so you can equip the character to make them good enough so that progressing through the story, boss fights, and domain farming will be less painful while you don't have a wide variety of artifacts yet. Once you understand that principle, you're ready to start considering set bonus optimizations. But before we continue optimizing artifacts, let's optimize some drip. Check out this Kazuha hoodie. It's by artist Lixizu, the sponsor of today's video, who creates beautiful, high-quality merch with subtle yet stylish designs like these Genshin Impact pins. You've got Ganyu, Ayaka, Raiden, even Senora and Dainsleif, and hoodies designed after Kazuha, Sino, and Xiao. I personally really love my hoodie. It's got thick and comfortable fabric, it's got pockets, and of course this beautiful embroidered design on its chest. The pins are also really lovely with their gold lining and can easily go on your bag or maybe your jacket or whatever. So if you're interested in shopping some really pretty merch and supporting Lixizu's art, check out her shop linked in the description and use this coupon code SEVI for a 5% discount. Thank you Lixizu for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. My tip number 5 is to consider rainbow or 2-piece set builds versus 4-piece sets. When it comes to putting together artifact sets, 2-piece and 4-piece set bonuses are there mainly to provide more stat value for your builds. For 2-piece sets with basic bonuses like attack percent or elemental damage percent, those are always nice to have. Except for those special sets we mentioned earlier, the advantage of most 4-piece sets is just a bigger boost to the stat value you get compared to 2-piece sets. What you'll eventually realize is that most of the time, even 2-piece set combinations can easily get close, equal, or in some cases even surpass the potential of a 4-piece build. And that's through the power of substats. 4-piece sets are harder to farm, as you not only need to get those 4 pieces of the same set, you also have to get the right main stats on them, then eventually consider if they have good substats as well. Contrast that to 2-piece combos, or even 2-piece plus rainbow sets, which are easier to complete since you remove that restriction of sticking to a full set. For example, let's take the Gilded Dreams set. The 2-piece bonus gives 80 EM, and the 4-piece bonus gives EM and attack based on your team composition, so let's say it gives you 100 EM and 14% attack. All in all, the 2-piece and 4-piece bonuses give additional 180 EM and 14% attack. Compare that to if you have a 2-piece bonus of EM sets, giving an additional 160 EM in total. So if you compare that, the difference is really 20 EM and 14% attack. That means your 2-piece build will only need about 4 substat rolls to practically have the same value as a 4-piece Gilded Dreams set, and even more substats will make it start to surpass the 4-piece set. And if you're using it for a Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, or Bloom trigger where attack isn't important, then the primary difference is just 20 EM or 1 substat roll. On the other hand, some sets are also concerned with boosting the own character stats, but the stat value they offer is so incredibly high that the gap between 2-piece combos and the 4-piece set is often very significant. The main example right now is the 4-piece Marechaussee Hunter, which offers a whopping 36% crit rate under the right trigger conditions. Now, those are very specific cases to certain characters, but for the most part, I've learned that not every character needs a full 4-piece set of their best in slot, especially when the difference between a really good 2-piece set can be quite small. For example, if we take a look at some theory-crafted calcs over on Kaching mains, Xiao's ideal full sets are 4-piece Vermilion and 4-piece Marechaussee now, but the difference between those and a 2-piece combo can be anywhere between 2% and 9%, which can be overcome by 1 to 5 substats. If you take a Melt Rosaria, she has some full set options like Lava Walker, Gilded Dreams, Emblem, but at lower ER requirements, they are only 1 to 2% better than 2-piece Blizzard Stray or 2-piece Noblesse combo. So in such cases, it might just be more efficient to aim for the 2-piece set. And if the gap between a 4-piece set is quite important to you, then that's something you can take care of later on when you've already sufficiently built enough of your characters. Now, some of you might be thinking, but isn't it more efficient to go for a full 4-piece because you're focused on farming one domain anyway? Well, you can get lucky going all in on one domain and coming out with a good full set, but if you find yourself stuck or struggling, then maybe you actually have really good pieces lying around that can complement the domain set you've been farming, such as 2-piece Glad or 2-piece Wanderers, or pieces you've previously farmed and such. And if you do, then it's ultimately more efficient to settle with that for now. Don't forget that there's always room for an off-piece as well, whether for a 4-piece set or 2-piece combo, most especially if it's the right elemental damage bonus or elemental mastery piece, which are harder to get. So don't discard or disregard potential non-set pieces that have good stats. My next tip is to determine resin-efficient farming habits. There's what I and many other guide makers will label as a resin-efficient domain or methods for farming artifacts, which especially have a lot of benefits when you're in the process of building multiple characters. So what is a resin-efficient domain? That's when the 2-piece sets have near universal applicability that you can slap them on most characters, and even better when the 4-piece set or sets are used by so many characters too. For a long time until now, the Emblem Shimenawa domain in Inazuma is still considered a really good domain to farm in. The Emblem of Severed Fate set is the best in slot or one of the best in slots for many burst-reliant units. And its 2-piece bonus, which gives ER, is always useful to help reach good ER stats for so many units as well. The Shimenawa 4-piece set doesn't have the same level of widespread applicability, but its 2-piece bonus gives attack, which is a staple for any attack scaling unit. Another domain that can become extremely resin efficient is Fontaine's Marechaussee and Golden Troop domain, most particularly when you get Furina. The Golden Troop is Furina's best in slot, but as for the Marishose Hunter, a few characters can enable its effects thanks to their own innate HP changing mechanics, while most other pre-Fontaine characters can't. But with Furina's team HP drain, she can basically make the Marishose very strong or even the best set for many DPSs. So with this domain, you're effectively farming for Furina and many other DPSs you can pair with her. Now on the flip side, let's talk about what's considered less resin efficient, and those are domains that are more niche in value. You might really want one of the sets that it offers, but you'll have little to no use for the other set it's paired with. Let's take the Husk of Opulent Dreams and Ocean Hued Clam domain. The former is a top set for Ito and Noelle, defense scaling Geo DPSs, and the latter is for certain healers like Kokomi and Chi-Chi. However, for it to feel efficient, you'd need to have those specific characters for both sets, which is already a narrow list in the first place. If your main concern is horizontally building your characters, I'll always recommend going for more universal sets first. But thankfully, the introduction of the Strongbox and its updates over time have made artifact farming a whole lot easier, and I would argue even made certain domains just almost or absolutely not worth bothering with anymore. Our next tip is all about the Strongbox and how it is your friend. There was a time when the Strongbox felt like a scam, especially when it was first introduced. The premise was that you can only feed 5-star artifacts, and for every 3 pieces, you can exchange it for 1 5-star piece. What made it unremarkable at first is that its first 4 artifact choices were quite limited. We had Glad, Wanderer's Troop, Noblesse, and Bloodstained Chivalry, but thankfully it's been expanded now to 22 sets, which include all Mondstadt, Liyue, and Inazuma-based artifacts as of now. If there's a set you want but don't like the domain it's in, the Strongbox is your best friend. You can single out a specific artifact set without necessarily having to sink so much resin into their more niche domain just by feeding trash artifacts. Not only that, but it's been established that there's a higher chance of getting a piece that starts with 4 stat lines in the Strongbox compared to domains. So there are a few ways to use the Strongbox. First is for parallel set farming. Farm a set that you want that's exclusively in a domain, and then feed the trash to another set you also want in the Strongbox. This can be especially helpful in diversifying your build options between new and old artifact sets. You can also go for hyper-focusing. If the set is found in both the Strongbox and the domain, you can farm its domain and feed the trash pieces into the Strongbox towards the same set. This would likely be done for a DPS you're hyper-investing in, like with the Crimson Witch set, or for a set that has a lot of users, like the Emblem set, or if you just want to increase your chances of getting a rare stat and set combo, like farming the VV domain and strongboxing it to get an EM piece for your Kazuha. You can also just use the Strongbox for perfecting builds. If you already have functional builds in your characters but want to reach a higher ceiling, then just keep going for a specific set there that can replace your existing good pieces. Whatever way you do plan on using it, just know that you can get a lot of value from the Strongbox, so don't hesitate to try it out. Tip number 8 is to stop obsessing over crit value. For some DPSs, like a Hyperbloom or Burgeon Trigger that mainly cares about stacking EM, crit isn't important. But for a lot of other characters, it is. So much so that there's still this notion that having as much crit as possible is the best metric to judge a godly or cracked artifact piece. A piece's crit rate and crit damage stats can be combined through this formula to get its crit value, like in the sample I calculated for you, and a lot of players rank artifacts based on how much CV they have. You know what? I get it. I mean, having that jacked up crit damage looks so juicy and nice, and it's impressive when the crit rate stat looks like it should be a crit damage stat. Crit is definitely an important stat for crit scaling DPSs, but it's not the only valuable stat. Getting taken too far by CV obsession is unhealthy, and it can lead to unnecessary frustration, or worse, it might cause you to undervalue artifacts that are actually good despite having a lower CV. I've learned to take a more holistic look at artifact pieces and their stat quality, and I always recommend my viewers to do so too. Characters with reactions like EM rolls. Attack scaling characters in Bennett-less teams really like attack rolls. HP is still valuable for HP scalers. Getting enough energy recharge is very important for many characters to ensure smooth rotations, and so on. If your artifact's rolls go into relevant stats aside from crit rate and crit damage, that's still totally a win. I have an older video series about holistically evaluating and optimizing artifacts based not on their crit value, but their overall substat count. As a quick overview, you essentially count how many useful substats are on each piece, where you use the average roll of a stat as your unit. If you want to know what substat goals are considered good to high to godly investment, I also discuss it there, and this can also help you evaluate whether to keep farming for a character or move on to another. Anyway, this method is a means of quantifying your build quality, where even if you want to aim for a good crit ratio, typically 1:2 crit rate to crit damage, stats like attack, EM, and ER all contribute to the overall strength and investment of the build. As my final tip, you can try out different artifact or build-related tools. In-game, there's the Artifact Autolocker, where you can set up auto-locking plans per artifact set. For newer players, it can look overwhelming to set up at first, but this tool might be helpful in the long run. It's really a matter of learning which substats are relevant to the characters you're farming for. You can look at it as a good way to kickstart your artifact stat knowledge, or put into practice some of the tips we've gone through here. On the other hand, if you're an older player with lots of artifact farming experience, this tool might not look very useful, but you could also use it to auto-lock rare main stats like EM or elemental damage goblets, or even hyper-focus on targeting certain stats for perfecting your build. Now, the next tools are community-made tools, and I'll be linking them all in the description, with this next one being an ER calculator. It essentially helps you calculate the optimal ER needed for a character in specific teams and combat scenarios. I find this tool really useful since the in-game artifact data for stats don't show anything for ER, besides players using ER sands on certain characters, and though guides often suggest ER ranges for characters, this ER calculator can help you get a more precise recommendation based on the scenario. There's also a Genshin optimizer, which analyzes your artifacts and prescribes optimized builds. When you get to the site, you'll immediately see they have easy tutorials to help you get started. It does need a lot of input about your artifacts, but if you're trying to choose between certain pieces or builds to see what would output the best damage, then the optimizer can do that for you. Another is the Anka network, which I personally like to use to check builds from other servers, because you can easily display your entire character's build within a card and even enable substat breakdown on pieces, which makes for really easy counting and evaluation. Linked to that is the Akasha system, where you can view build leaderboards or just browse other people's builds. It can also rank your build in its database, but don't sweat it because Genshin isn't a competitive game after all. So if you're interested in tools like these, then you can go ahead and join theory crafting community discords like Kaching Mains, since that's where you can usually hear about such tools from other players. And that's going to be it for these artifact farming tips. Though these are tips for general artifact farming, remember that each character has their own specific considerations that will affect your farming goals and priorities. Referring to character guides, and I have a ton if you need them, can certainly help you in that regard. But at the end of the day, just remember that it's a process. It can be a pretty brutal one too. So if you made it this far, comment down below an artifact tip you'd like to share with your fellow players, or simply share something about your own artifact experience. I'd love to know. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!